She's going to talk about results of a 5-year monitoring for the Regional Monitoring Coalition.
Thank you. So Arun and I are both going to tell you about our results from 5 years of bioassessment monitoring conducted by the Regional Monitoring Coalition in the San Francisco Bay Area. So before I get started, I just want to acknowledge our project partners. This project was funded by the Bay Area Stormwater Management Agencies Association, or BASMAA. We received some technical advice from Rafi Mazur at SWRCB, and we used data from our participating countywide programs as well as the San Francisco Bay Regional Board. Jim gave you a little bit of information, but I'll tell you a little bit more about who the BASMAA Regional Monitoring Coalition, or RMC, is. I'll give you a little bit of background on this study, and then I'll pass it off to Arun to tell you about the results. The BASMAA RMC was formed in 2010 when the first regional stormwater permit was issued in the Bay Area. The BASMAA RMC includes 5 participating counties, and they joined together to develop a coordinated monitoring program to address the municipal regional permit requirements. Although we have one coordinated monitoring program, monitoring is conducted individually by each of the counties. Monitoring began in 2012, and it covers an area of 6,000 stream miles within about 3,400 square miles. You'll see on the map that not every county in the Bay Area is part of the BASMAA RMC. San Francisco, Marin, Napa, and Sonoma counties are covered under different permits, and they have different independent monitoring. The key elements of the BASMAA RMC creek status monitoring program include biological indicators and potential stressors. We follow the swamp protocols for collecting BMIS and algae, as well as water quality grab samples and physical habitat measurements. Sample sites are collected on a probabilistic basis with a sample draw that was designed using the GERTS methods. This allows for a regional assessment of creek condition, as well as assessments on individual countywide bases. We also share our data, because we developed our sample draw in the same manner, we share our data with the statewide perennial streams assessment and other regional programs. We have a master draw of almost 6,000 sites. It includes perennial and non-perennial streams, and sites are classified by land use and county. Because our monitoring is conducted under an MS4 stormwater permit, the BASMAA RMC decided at the outset to focus monitoring efforts on urban creeks. Approximately 80% of the monitoring effort is in those creeks classified as urban. There's a different level of effort by location, roughly based on population, and we have a regional database developed by BASMAA. We also upload all of our data to CDN, so it is available to the public. This slide lists the study management questions for this study. The first question, the first sort of compound question is specified in the municipal regional permit. The other questions probably look familiar because most monitoring programs have these same questions, and they help us organize our study so that we can take this large amount of data, turn it into information, and then hopefully use that information, hopefully have stormwater programs use that information to make decisions about their management actions and to communicate with regulators. So the first thing that we did was query our regional database and compile all of our data together. We looked at the results of our site evaluations and saw that we had about a 76% rejection rate in our sites from the probabilistic master draw. Apparently this is a little bit high compared to some other programs, and that's probably due to the fact that we have non-perennial creeks in our design. So one of the main reasons for rejection is that the creek has no flow during the index period. We also have a lot of issues with gaining permission to access sites, particularly in the non-urban area where we have some very large private landowners. In evaluating our probabilistic monitoring design, we noted that there were some issues that we attribute to challenges with coordinating 5 separate stormwater programs. There's been some errors in database entry. These errors may have happened even if the monitoring were conducted by one program, but I think that they're magnified by having so many different players uploading data to the database. And we also saw that there's been some consistency issues in how the different programs follow the site evaluation process and code the sites. So some of the programs have been holding on to sites in the hopes that they'll gain permission in future years rather than reject them right away. Another critique that we've had with the probabilistic design, I mentioned earlier that BASMAA RMC has focused their effort on urban sites. However, urban sites only make up about 30% of the master draw. So this unequal focus in the urban area not only compromises the probabilistic nature of the design, but it also would have resulted in an overall assessment that looks like we have worse creek condition than we actually do because we have so many urban sites. So what we decided to do was to re-weight the sample sites so that we had a more even treatment of the different land areas. And now I'll pass it on to Arun, who will tell you about the results of our analysis.
So this map shows 354 sites that were sampled in the first 5 years of the program. As Bonnie mentioned, there was a focus on urban sites. So the gray area on this map is the urban boundary. So 80% of those sites fell in there, and only 70 sites fell outside, or 20% of the total sites that we sampled. So if you look at the results here, they've been scored against the CSCI index, and I'll also show you results for the algae data that have been scored against the Southern California IBIs. Throughout the maps and the data I'll be showing, the lowest scores are going to be colored in purple, and then the higher scores, the better scores, will be colored in green. There'll be a range from purple, red, yellow to green. So as you can see, there's a lot of purple on this map. The majority of the sites, or 69% of them, the CSCI scores fell in that very likely altered condition. So it had a score of less than 0.63. Most of the good sites fell outside of the urban area, and that colored in green and in yellow. There are about 10% of those. So those occurred more in the non-urban area. Because these sites were selected in a probabilistic manner, we can also talk about them as a population of streams rather than just the individual sites that we sampled. So to do that, we converted the data into these weighted CDFs. So the colors are still consistent, showing the different condition categories. And then we generated a CDF curve using all the sites, so the non-urban and urban sites together, as well as just the urban sites, since we had a main focus on those. We didn't generate a non-urban CDF curve on its own because there were relatively fewer sites there. And there was also an issue with some of the evaluations being missing, so the confidence intervals would have had some great uncertainty. So change these CDFs into pie charts for easy interpretation. So here, looking at all the data together, we see that 58% of the stream length fell in that very likely altered, and there was only 15% in the green category with the likely intact. So overall, we're seeing 58% of the stream length, but if we look at just the urban sites, there's 78% of that stream life fell in that very likely ultimate loss. So a lot of the lower scores were occurring from just the urban sites. And you'll also see that there is a much smaller proportion of sites that would be classified as being good, or in the yellow and green category. So most of the poorer condition sites were coming from the urban area. Contrast that with the algae results. So on the left side, I'm showing the results from the diatom-based index, the D18, and then on the right side, the S2 score results. So those are based off the soft body algae. So very obviously, we have a lower proportion of stream length that's falling that lower condition category, around 40% of the stream length. And we had more occurring in the green category, or the likely intact. So if we compare these to algae versus the BMI-based data, it appears that algae are in better condition. But we also do need to take into account that these indices were prior to the ASCII index, and so they're only based off of data that were calibrated for Southern California streams. So it's potential that streams are in better condition for algae, but also could be about our assessment methodology. One interesting pattern is that for the D18 score, we see that urban sites are very similar in their distribution to all sites combined. So we weren't seeing quite as much of a difference between urban and non-urban sites. Whereas the distribution for the soft-bodied algae-based data is more similar to the BMI, in that we see the urban site curve being further to the left, indicating poorer scores compared to all sites combined. So one of the dominant patterns is obviously one of land use. So here is the CSCI scores plotted by county, and then between non-urban and urban. And then I included on the first box plot all the data combined. So for the non-urban sites, we see quite a bit of variability that's probably largely driven by the lower sample size. In certain years, certain counties focused more on non-urban sites than in other years. So there's some of that year-to-year variation as well. But generally, we're seeing scores varying in terms of their median score anywhere from about 0.4 to 0.9 in the non-urban area. Whereas in the urban area, there was much more consistency, with the median scores being more closer to 0.4 and 0.5. We also saw that there were certain counties that had more success in finding sites that had a score greater than 1. So there were sites in the non-urban area, both in Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, where there were a few sites that were greater than 1, but those didn't often occur in some of the other counties. And then notably, in the urban area, we span a much wider range in scores based on the different types of streams that we saw. So the next step in our analysis was then to see, what are the potential drivers for this kind of broad scale differences between non-urban and urban sites, and are there stressors that are really good delineators of the condition scores? So the way that we approached this was with a random forest analysis to throw in any of the stressors that we thought that could be potentially explaining the condition scores. And our goal was to get a ranked order of the most important variables. We included all the data, all the perennial long-perennial streams, and all the urban and non-urban sites. We wanted to contrast what the response could be between BMI-based assemblages and algae assemblages. So we used the CSCI score and the D18 index scores in 2 different sets of models. We could have done the same with S2, except there were some missing data, and so we kind of prioritized these 2 models. I split up the data set into a calibration data set. So 80% of the samples stratified by county were randomly selected for the model. And then I saved 20% of the samples that I then used to predict using the ultimate model for each of those models that I developed. The stressor data that we used were the water quality variables that were collected at the same time as the bioassessments. So these are the SON measurements for dissolved oxygen, pH, and temperature, and then the water samples that are collected for both conventional analytes as well as nutrients. the habitat data or the pebble count data that we collected at the same time as the bioassessment data, as well as some of the metrics that were being incorporated into the PHAB index that we got from Andy Wren that we thought that could potentially work in our model. And then we also calculated land use-based metrics based in GIS, and these were like the road density and the amount of impervious area. And we looked at different scales, both the amount around each site, as well as the scales of 1 to 5 kilometers, as well as active watersheds there. So we had 49 stressor variables that we then threw into these models that I then tried to optimize what are the most important ones. This is a table that is the output of the CSCI random forest model, where I was able to find 8 predictor variables that were optimal for predicting CSCI score. So this table shows you the rank of importance, with the top ones being more important than the ones below, as well as the rank correlation coefficient. The ones in brown are the land use related variables, the one in blue is water quality related, and the green ones are the physical habitat. When I developed this model and then tried to predict scores for that 20% of samples that held out, I got a R-squared of around 61%. So a reasonably good model using these 8 variables. It seemed to be largely dominated by land use. So all 4 of the variables for land use were related to imperviousness. And then there were also 3 variables that were more related to the sediment substrate and flow. So there was an indication that it's kind of more of a impervious influence as well as a lesser influence of physical habitat. Interestingly, we didn't find any of the nutrient variables coming out in this model. So I then went to plot the observed data, taking the output from that CSCI random forest model that indicated an impervious type relationship. So I plotted the variable that came out highest in my model table, which is the percent impervious in a 5-kilometer radius of each bioassessment site. So on the left here, I'm showing the relationship between the CSCI score and the percent impervious area. And so not surprisingly, we see this delineation between the non-urban sites shown in red and then the urban sites. So non-urban sites tended to have low impervious area, not surprisingly, and had generally higher condition scores. So we just see this general relationship. What was also most interesting was once we classified the impervious area by the 4 condition classes based off of the CSCI score, we saw this good separation between the top 2 condition classes and the bottom 2. And a threshold of around 10% impervious area seemed to be a good kind of break point between the good scores and the poor scores. So this kind of corroborated the results from the random forest that indicated there is a kind of a correlation between impervious area or good scores. We now look at the results for the D18 based model. Found a different pattern. Firstly, the model was not good at explaining D18 score. Using these 6 variables, I was only able to explain about 34% of the variance. So there's a lot of more noise to this data set. Also, the variables that were coming out were more water quality related, shown in blue. The top ranked variable was the specific conductivity. We also found phosphorus and chloride. These variables, although they came out in the model, they were really being driven by just 1 or 2 extreme values. So it seems like it was more of a kind of general water quality trend for us. And overall, it was kind of a weaker model compared to what we were seeing with CSCI. I still went ahead and plotted the observed data using the variable that came highest ranked in the D18 model, which was specific conductivity. So we don't see that good separation based off of land use like we were seeing for imperviousness with CSCI. We also see more of an overlap in condition classes based off of conductivity. So there was no kind of clear break point where you'd say if you had this type of conductivity in the stream, you would have poor or better condition. So the algae-based data didn't seem to have as clear association with stressors as we were seeing with the BMI. We also wanted to look at whether there would be any changes over time in this data set. As Bob was mentioning in his talk earlier this morning, a 5-year data set isn't ideal for looking for trends. We didn't really expect to see them, but we wanted to see what kind of patterns there were. We separated out the data based off of non-urban, which is on the left, and then urban on the right, and then for each of the years. So as we saw in some of the graphics earlier, there's quite a bit of variability in the sample sizes for the non-urban areas, so we had quite a bit of variability, anywhere from a median score of close to 0.5, which occurred in 2015, all the way to close to 1 in 2012. So there's quite a bit of a variation year to year, potentially driven by sample size. That could be something to track in the future. Interestingly, in the urban area that was very well sampled, we found quite a bit of consistency in the median scores year to year. So only 2016 seemed to have a little bit of a jump up, and 2015 was a little bit lower. So we didn't really expect to see a trend here, and this kind of confirms that. I think the fact that these sites were only visited once, we'd only been able to detect really broad regional trends, not trends at any specific watershed or specific sites. So that might be something to look at in the future. It's also important to remember, for in context, that we were in a drier than average period. This is the annual rainfall at San Francisco Airport, which highlights that the period of the survey was in a lower than average rainfall period. So any potential signal over time may have been muted due to this more stressful conditions. Knowing that we've now come out of this period and are in a more wetter climate, it'll be interesting to see if there's any change in those scores in the more recent 2 years of data. And the take-home messages from the data that were collected during these first 5 years were that there was a clear urban stream signal. Urban streams were the priority for our sampling, so we've really kind of well characterized those conditions and have shown them to be poorer than those in the non-urban area. We also found that higher scores were more rare for CSCI than they were for the algae scores. This could be real in terms of algae being in better condition than the benthic assemblages, or it could be that we need to more optimize and use the newer ASCII index to calibrate for other parts of the state. We did see differences in the stressors that seem to be related to the benthic assemblages versus the diatoms. There was unclear response to nutrients, but a clear response of imperviousness related to the CSCI score, whereas conductivity was more important for the diatom results. So the next steps for the BASMAA RMC is that we're still continuing our bioassessment monitoring that are conducted during the debt period each year, at least through the end of our permit term in 2020, so we can generate our report of waste discharge. We're also engaged in the new assessment tools that are coming out, the ASCII index and the PHAB index, and so we'll be looking to incorporate those into our future assessments of the data. We've done a good job at answering our management question, the main one that's in the MRP, of whether conditions in receiving waters are supportive of beneficial uses. I think the data has clearly shown that they are not, and that we've identified some stressors that need to be addressed in the future related to imperviousness and physical habitat. So we're working with our stormwater programs to implement BMPs and green infrastructure plans that might be able to address these stressors in the future, both for benthic invertebrates as well as for algae. And then we're starting the process of evaluating our monitoring approach and engaged with our waterborne risk representatives on potential ways to optimize the program into the future. This could take the form of identifying new management questions or refocusing the program towards looking at trends or changes at specific sites that can be subject to BMPs or other practices that might improve the condition for the biotech structure. And then there's obviously the new biostimulatory policy that will be coming soon that we're aware of, and the program will be seeking to respond to those, both in the data and monitoring data that we collect, and how we assess that to address those needs in the future. That you can take any questions.
out there for any of the samples, but I've seen these relationships between impervious surface and so is it the change in flow caused by the imperviousness, or is it just that the habitat is so screwed up because the flow has been changed?
I think it's a combination of factors. I think the imperviousness is just a general indication that these are in stressful environments, they're close to roads, they are more disturbed. So I think it's a challenge of something to deal with, obviously, because we can't get rid of the people and the roads and everything. So I think it's more just an indication that these are more in stressed environments and not that it's any specific thing related to imperviousness itself.
Yeah, the reason I ask, if it's just the flow, then you can affect change through green infrastructure and that stuff. But if it's basically because you concretize the channels,
Right.
then we have to go back to Rodney's thing.
Yeah. I think that there is this range that we do see. So it's not you have high imperviousness and you're definitely going to be bad. There's kind of this range of condition that we're seeing that kind of is this complex signal that